Imagine this. You grind your whole life, work overtime, save every penny, and finally achieve your dream home in the upscale Willow Creek Residences, a fancy place with a sparkling private pool. For Ethan Carter, that pool was more than a luxury. It was his sanctuary, where he planned to enjoy peaceful Sundays with friends, music, and laughter. But his new neighbor, Patricia Hayes, had other plans. Patricia, a woman in her early 50s with a sharp tongue and an air of owning everything, treated Ethan's pool like it was a public club. On the first day after moving in, Ethan caught her floating on one of his pool floats, sipping a drink like she was the queen of the place. He thought, maybe she's just confused. Little did he know how wrong he was. The midday sun scorched Ethan's backyard, turning the concrete around the pool into an oven. The water shimmered, a blue oasis he'd dreamed of for years while scrimping and saving to buy that house. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, took a deep breath, and rehearsed a smile that felt more like a grimace. He didn't want to fight, just peace. He approached the low fence separating his yard from his neighbor's, where Patricia reigned sprawled on a lounge chair like she owned the place. "Hi, Patricia," he began, his voice firm but polite. "This pool is mine, you—" "No, it's a private area. I'd really appreciate it if you didn't use it." He gestured toward his yard with an almost timid motion, as if he needed to justify that this square meter of paradise was in fact his. Patricia didn't even bother to look up from the gossip magazine she was flipping through with disdain. She fanned herself with it, the paper making an annoying flap-flap in the silence. "Oh, Ethan, don't be such a bore," she said, dragging her words with a tone that mixed boredom and superiority. "It's just a pool, we're neighbors, what's the problem?" She finally glanced at him, but it was a look that cut through Ethan like he was a mosquito buzzing at the wrong time. Ethan's smile wilted. It wasn't just the intrusion, it was her attitude, as if he were the intruder in his own home, a gatecrasher in his own dream. He opened his mouth to retort, but Patricia had already returned to her magazine, turning the page with a dramatic sigh. Ethan stood there, heat rising up his neck, torn between telling her to get out and swallowing his pride to avoid a scene. He opted for a strategic retreat, muttering an "all right" that sounded weaker than he intended. As he walked back to the house, the sound of Patricia's feet splashing in the water echoed like a taunt. In the following days, Patricia turned Ethan's pool into her personal club. She showed up unannounced, sometimes alone, sometimes with one or two friends who laughed loudly and scattered plastic cups around the deck. It was as if his backyard had become the neighborhood hotspot, and Ethan, the invisible janitor. One afternoon, he tried again. He waited until Patricia was alone without her entourage and approached with a coffee mug in hand, trying to seem casual. "Patricia, seriously, I worked hard for this house. The pool is my space, you know. I want some privacy." She slid her sunglasses down, letting them hang at the tip of her nose, and stared at him with a half smile dripping with sarcasm. "Privacy? Ethan, please. This neighborhood used to have standards, you know, before people like you showed up, with these ideas of ownership." She laughed, a short, sharp laugh like a knife, and leaned back, as if the conversation was over before it even started. Ethan felt his blood pound in his temples. People like him? What did that mean? Him who stayed up late reviewing spreadsheets, cutting expenses, dreaming of this backyard? Him who greeted everyone on the street, who even brought muffins to the neighborhood meeting? Patricia's audacity was a punch to the gut, but the worst was her calm, as if he didn't even deserve the effort of a real argument. The heat that afternoon was punishing, the kind that made the air shimmer and glued your shirt to your back. Ethan parked his car in the garage, dreaming of a cold beer and the silence of his backyard. But before he even opened the door, the sound of blaring pop music invaded his ears, mixed with laughter and the splash of someone diving into the water. He frowned, confused, and walked to the living room window. What he saw made him freeze. His pool looked like the epicenter of a magazine-worthy party. 5 strangers were swimming, floating on unicorn and donut inflatables, while Patricia, in an oversized straw hat and mirrored sunglasses, served colorful drinks like the queen of a resort. Ethan felt the blood rush to his head. Every ounce of anger he'd swallowed over the past week surged, hot and bitter. He tossed his keys on the table, took a deep breath and marched to the backyard, his shoes pounding the wooden deck with a rhythm that echoed his determination. The music, some generic hit he'd never choose to listen to, pulsed through. Patricia's portable speakers and the smell of sunscreen and margaritas hung in the air. "Patricia," Ethan's voice cut through the noise, firm but still clinging to the last thread of civility. He stopped at the pool's edge, arms crossed, staring at her. "This is my property. You and your friends need to leave. Now." Patricia, who was mixing a drink with the calm of someone who owes nothing to anyone, didn't turn immediately. She finished pouring something neon into a glass, took a sip, and only then looked at him, tossing her hair back with theatrical flair. "Ethan, relax," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is practically a community space. You can't just monopolize the fun." She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and the guests, a group of 20-somethings, Ethan had never seen before, stifled giggles, exchanging looks as if he were the spoilsport. Ethan blinked, stunned. Community? Monopolizing? He looked around, seeing disposable cups floating in the water, a towel tossed on his pristine lawn, and a guy in a backward cap yelling, "Cannonball!" before diving in. It was too much. He took a step forward, his voice lowering into a tone that mixed anger and clarity. "Patricia, this isn't a public park, it's my home. I paid for every inch of this. You have 5 minutes to grab your stuff and leave, or I'm calling the police." For a second, the air grew heavy. Some guests stopped swimming, glancing sideways, but Patricia, she laughed, a loud, mocking laugh that made Ethan clench his fists. "Police? My God, Ethan, how dramatic! You really don't know how to live in society, do you?" She turned to her friends, rolling her eyes. "He thinks he's the king of the neighborhood." That's when something snapped inside Ethan. It wasn't just the pool, the drinks, the music. It was the way Patricia spoke, her biting comments about standards and people like him that she threw like knives disguised as jokes. He realized with cutting clarity that she didn't just want to use the pool. She seemed to believe he didn't have a right to it, as if he were an outsider who needed to be put in his place. And those giggles from her friends, they were the chorus of a battle Ethan hadn't asked for, but could no longer avoid. Ethan wasn't one to stand still, and the humiliation of Patricia's party still burned like an ember. The next day, he turned his backyard into a fortress. He hired a team that, in a few hours, erected a tall, black metal fence, high enough to block even the most curious gazes. The gate, reinforced with steel, came with a digital lock that blinked a red LED like a silent warning, "Don't test your luck." High-definition security cameras with motion sensors and microphones were installed at strategic points, capturing every inch of the pool area. Ethan even adjusted the angles to catch the reflection of the crystal-clear water, just to be safe. The cherry on top, a shiny aluminum sign bolted to the fence, "Private property, no trespassing." As he tightened the last screw on the sign, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, the backyard felt like his again. He stepped back, admiring the work, and allowed himself a smile. "Take that, Patricia," he muttered, imagining her face when she came up against the fortress. But Patricia wasn't one to back down. 2 days later, Ethan was in his makeshift office in the living room, reviewing emails with the air conditioning cranked to combat the stifling heat. Suddenly, a metallic clang cut through the silence, followed by a muffled shout. He frowned, grabbed his phone and opened the camera app. The image on the screen was almost comical. Patricia, in a garish floral dress and crooked sunglasses, was yanking on the gate with both hands, her face red as a chili pepper. "This is outrageous," she shouted, kicking the fence with sandals that seemed more decorative than practical. The microphone caught every word, every grumble. "You think you can lock me out? Who do you think you are, Ethan?" Ethan tilted, his head, almost admiring her stubbornness. It was like watching a reality show live, except the villain was meters away. Patricia stopped pulling the gate, panting, and grabbed her phone, pacing back and forth like a general planning an attack. "This isn't over," she hissed, typing furiously. Ethan zoomed in, curious, and saw the exact moment she hit call. The call lasted less than a minute, but the way she straightened her shoulders and crossed her arms said it all. Reinforcements were on the way. Minutes later, the sound of sirens pierced the neighborhood, a shrill wail that made neighbors peek through their curtains. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline rise, but he stayed calm. He wasn't the intruder here. The cameras, the sign, the fence, everything screamed that he was in the right. The afternoon sun was still relentless, and the sound of sirens had already faded, but Ethan's backyard looked like an improvised theater stage. Patricia, rooted on the sidewalk, waved her arms as if conducting an invisible orchestra, her floral dress billowing and her straw hat nearly falling off her head. "Thank God you're here," she exclaimed, her voice wavering between indignation and victimhood. "This man is harassing me. He locked the pool just to provoke me like I'm some kind of criminal." She pointed a trembling finger at Ethan, as if he were the villain in a soap opera. Ethan, watching everything from the porch, took a deep breath and walked down the steps with the calm of someone who knows he's got the ace up his sleeve. He kept his hands visible, a habit he had learned over years of handling delicate situations. "Good afternoon, officers," he said, his voice firm but polite, with a slight smile that concealed the anger bubbling inside him. What seems to be the problem? The lead officer, a middle-aged woman with the name Mendez stitched on her uniform, had sharp eyes and an expression that said, "I've seen this movie before." Next to her, a younger cop with a patchy goatee held a notepad, clearly trying to keep up with the drama. Mendez crossed her arms, looking from Patricia, who was still gesturing wildly, to Ethan, who looked like the embodiment of serenity. "This lady here says you're causing trouble," Mendez said in a neutral tone. "Claims you locked her out and that it's some kind of harassment." Ethan raised his eyebrows, almost laughing at the word harassment. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering the idea, and replied, "I haven't spoken to her today, officer, but I have footage that explains exactly what's going on." He pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the camera app, and selected the video of Patricia in action. The screen showed in high definition the neighbor yanking the gate forcefully, kicking the fence and shouting, "Who do you think you are, Ethan?" with a rage that bordered on the theatrical. The microphone even captured the sound of her sandals slapping the concrete. Patricia, who until then had maintained her victim act, turned pale as if she had seen a ghost. Her eyes widened and her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then, like a volcano erupting, she exploded. "That's fake. He doctored the video, must have used some kind of software, Photoshop or something." She turned to Mendez, hands on her hips. "You're not going to believe that problematic neighbor, are you?" Officer Mendez, unfazed, took Ethan's phone and watched the video carefully, her brow furrowed. The younger officer peeked over her shoulder, biting his lip to suppress a smile. When the video ended, Mendez handed the phone back and looked Patricia in the eye. "Ma'am," she said, with a patience that seemed to be running thin, "this is his property. The footage shows you trying to force your way in. You have no right to be here, let alone to damage the fence." Patricia blinked, stunned, as if the idea of being in the wrong had never crossed her mind. But I'm his neighbor," she stammered, her voice faltering. "We used to share the pool. It was a community thing. He can't just lock me out like that." She looked to the younger officer for support, but the man just scribbled in his notepad, avoiding eye contact. Mendez sighed, adjusting her belt. "Let me be clear. One more attempt to enter this property and you'll be charged. Trespassing, property damage, maybe even disturbing the peace. Understood?" She paused, letting the words hang in the hot air. Patricia opened her mouth, closed it, and finally nodded, her shoulders dropping as if all the air had been sucked out of her. Ethan stood silently by, his face neutral, but inside he was triumphant. It felt like the yard, the pool, the house, everything he had fought for had been restored to him in that moment. As the officers walked away and Patricia marched back to her house, grumbling to herself, Ethan thought it was over. He thought the police warning would be the final act, but underestimating Patricia was like thinking you can stop a storm with an umbrella. In the days that followed, she turned the neighborhood into an invisible battlefield. She'd pass by Ethan's fence with exaggerated steps, nose in the air and piercing glares that screamed, "You don't belong here." Sometimes she'd stop on the sidewalk, pretending to adjust her straw hat, just to let out an audible humph before moving on. But the real blow came in the shadows. Patricia became the queen of gossip, spreading venom among the neighbors, with the subtlety of a grenade. In the neighborhood WhatsApp group, messages began to pop up. "Does anyone else find that new neighbor kind of antisocial?" wrote one of Patricia's friends, followed by a couple of eye-roll emojis. Another neighbor, someone Ethan barely knew, replied, "Heard he's breaking HOA rules with that hideous fence." Ethan, who only checked the group for trash collection notices, read everything with a mix of anger and disbelief. Hideous. The fence was elegant, black with modern lines, better looking than half the crooked mailboxes on the street. He saw what this was. Patricia was trying to annoy him, isolate him, until he gave up and reopened the backyard. But Ethan wasn't one to throw in the towel. The final blow came in the form of a letter from the Homeowners Association, delivered by a mailman who looked uncomfortable just holding the envelope. The complaint, signed by Patricia, claimed that Ethan's fence violated the aesthetic of Willow Creek and decreased the neighborhood's value. Ethan laughed out loud, alone in his kitchen, the paper trembling in his hands. Decreased value? He who polished the lawn like a trophy, who repainted the house to match the HOA color scheme. Patricia didn't just want the pool, she wanted him out of the picture. Determined to understand what fueled her crusade, Ethan became a detective. Sitting on his couch with a cup of rapidly cooling coffee, he dove into Patricia's social media. Her profile was a museum of vanity. Photos of her posing at the beach, clinking wine glasses, and captions about preserving the charm of Willow Creek. Between the posts were thinly veiled jabs. Nothing worse than new residents who don't get the spirit of the neighborhood. Ethan rolled his eyes but kept digging. Then, in a comment on a local group, he struck gold. Patricia bragging about her father, a former real estate agent who, according to her, made Willow Creek what it is today by keeping it exclusive in the 70s. The word exclusive made Ethan's stomach turn. He knew exactly what that meant in neighborhoods like this, in times like those. With the instinct of someone sensing an uncomfortable truth, Ethan dug deeper, accessing public records online. He spent hours scrolling through digitized, dusty archives until he found what he feared and expected. Patricia's father, Ronald Hargrove, had faced multiple lawsuits for discriminatory practices. Court documents from 1973 detailed how he had refused to sell homes in Willow Creek to Black and Latino families, using euphemisms like maintaining property values or protecting neighborhood harmony. One testimony recounted him telling a couple that people like you would be happier somewhere else. Ethan read it, the cursor blinking on the screen, and felt a chill down his spine. This wasn't just ancient history, it was the DNA of Patricia's attitude. Back on her social media, he saw the pattern: nostalgic posts about her father's legacy, old photos of Willow Creek with captions like, "Miss when the neighborhood had class." Patricia never mentioned the lawsuits, but her obsession with standards and her comments about people like Ethan echoed the same poison, polished through an Instagram filter. To her, Ethan, who had worked tirelessly to buy that house, who greeted all the neighbors who had dreamed of that pool, was an intruder, not because of who he was, but because of who she believed he shouldn't be. Ethan closed the laptop, the silence of the house broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Confronting Patricia directly would be useless. She'd play the victim, cry in the neighborhood group, maybe even call the police again. No. He had to be smarter, expose the truth in a way she couldn't twist. Ethan knew playing dirty wasn't his style, but letting Patricia continue her crusade wasn't an option either. After days of mulling it over, he decided to turn her venom into ammunition. Sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open and a mug of strong coffee in hand, he searched for local journalist contacts. He found Marcus Tate, an investigative reporter, for the Willow Creek Gazette, known for digging up uncomfortable truths in community disputes. Marcus's profile on X showed a history of stories about neighborhood feuds and social injustices, written in a style that blended hard facts with sharp irony. Perfect. Ethan thought, already typing an email. In the email, he poured everything out. Patricia's blatant intrusions into the pool, footage of her kicking the fence, the dramatic police call, and most importantly, the public records about her father's discriminatory past. He attached screenshots of Patricia's nostalgic posts with their thinly veiled remarks about new residents and her father's legacy. "I don't just want to complain," Ethan wrote. "I want people to know who she really is." Marcus replied in less than an hour. "This is hot. Give me a few days to check everything." Ethan closed the laptop, feeling a mix of relief and dread. He was playing high stakes now, but Patricia had left him no choice. A week later, while Ethan mowed the lawn under the scorching sun, his phone buzzed with a notification. The Willow Creek Gazette had published the story, and the headline hit like a punch. "Neighbor calls cops over private pool, but her family's racist past tells the real story." Ethan clicked, heart racing, and read. The article pulled no punches. It described Patricia's intrusions in detail, citing camera footage and the police warning. Then it dove into the past, the lawsuits against Ronald Hargrove, the discrimination allegations, the testimonies from Black and Latino families rejected in Willow Creek. Marcus connected the dots with surgical precision, showing how Patricia's remarks about standards and exclusivity echoed her father's mindset. There was even a quote from one of her ex-posts, "Miss when Willow Creek had class." The article ended with a cutting question. Who's really disrespecting the neighborhood? Ethan had barely finished reading when his phone exploded with notifications. The article had gone viral with thousands of shares on X and a flurry of comments. "This woman thinks she owns the neighborhood. Shameful," read one. Another, more direct. "Patricia, you don't own his pool. Stop it." The neighborhood WhatsApp group, once a stage for her gossip, turned into a ghost town. Neighbors who used to agree with Patricia, or at least nodded to avoid conflict, now avoided her. Ethan saw it happen in real time. At the bakery, a woman who used to chat endlessly with Patricia walked right past her, eyes glued to the floor. Patricia, of course, didn't stay silent. Hours after the article dropped, she posted a long rant on X, a wall of text full of complaints about misunderstandings and unfair attacks. "I've always been a welcoming neighbor," she wrote, "but some people prefer to defame rather than unite." She even tried to blame Ethan, calling him a recluse who doesn't understand our community. But the internet wasn't having it. The comments tore her apart. "Welcoming? You broke into the guy's backyard." And "Stop playing the victim. Patricia, the article has receipts." One user even posted a meme of a pool with the caption, "Ethan's property, not your personal spa." Ethan, sitting on the porch with a cold beer, watched Patricia's reputation implode with quiet satisfaction. The pool sparkled in the background, untouched, finally his. But he knew Patricia, even cornered, was like a snake, wounded but still capable of striking. He took a sip, eyes fixed on the fence, and thought about his next move. The article had been a solid hit, but Willow Creek was still simmering, and Ethan needed to make sure his victory wasn't temporary. The morning sun bathed Ethan's backyard, turning the pool into a shimmering mirror. He was kneeling by the edge, skimmer in hand, calmly scooping out leaves like someone who had finally reclaimed his sanctuary. The neighborhood had felt quieter since the Gazette article exploded, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt the weight of his war with Patricia beginning to lift. But her ego, like a ticking time bomb, wasn't ready to give up. Suddenly, the sound of furious footsteps shattered the silence. Ethan looked up and saw Patricia marching down the sidewalk, phone raised like a weapon, the screen glowing with the article that had unmasked her. Her usual floral dress was wrinkled, and her hair, normally impeccable, was falling out of its bun in messy strands. "You think you can destroy me with these lies?" she yelled, voice trembling with rage, stopping at the edge of the black fence that now symbolized her defeat. "You and that third-rate reporter. This is defamation." Ethan, still holding the skimmer, straightened up slowly, his face a mask of serenity. He wiped his hands on his shorts as if her tantrum were just a minor interruption and replied in a firm, calm voice, "I didn't write anything, Patricia, but the truth always comes out. Doesn't it?" He gave her a half-smile, the kind that said, "You dug this hole yourself." Patricia's eyes narrowed, two slits burning with fury. "You don't belong here, and you know it," she hissed, the venom in her voice so sharp that Ethan almost felt the sting. But before he could respond, Patricia, in a fit of blind rage, spotted a hot pink pool noodle left on her side of the fence, probably a leftover from one of her past intrusions. With a grunt, she grabbed the noodle and hurled it at Ethan with all her might, like a gladiator's spear. The noodle, light and pathetic, flew a few feet twirling through the air and landed harmlessly on Ethan's lawn with a sad little flop. Ethan raised an eyebrow, nearly laughing. "Seriously, Patricia? A pool noodle?" But her moment of glory was already crumbling. Across the street, the teenage neighbor Jake, always with his phone in hand, was recording everything from his porch, the camera capturing every second of the spectacle. And Ethan's own cameras, with their red LEDs blinking, were recording in high definition, the microphone picking up even her heavy breathing. Noticing the gleam of Jake's lens, Patricia froze, her face shifting from rage red to panic white. "Stop filming, you little brat," she yelled, pointing at him. In a panic, she turned to flee, but fate had other plans. The grass, damp from the morning dew, betrayed her high heels. In an instant, she slipped, arms flailing like a clumsy bird's wings, and landed squarely on her butt in a pile of leaves Ethan hadn't yet swept. A sharp ow escaped her, followed by the rustling of leaves, and Jake, unable to contain himself, burst out laughing, phone still recording. Ethan, standing with the skimmer in hand, just shook his head, the scene so absurd it could have been a sitcom. "You okay, Patricia?" he asked, his tone a mix of sarcasm and fake concern. She got up, covered in leaves, her pride in shambles, and limped away without saying a word, her phone forgotten on the sidewalk. Hours later, Jake's video was on fire on X, shared thousands of times under hashtags like "Just Noodle of Shame" and "Patricia Falls Hard." Memes exploded, a gif of the noodle flying with the caption, "When your racism takes a dive," another of Patricia falling with the words, "Noodle of Shame strikes again." The neighborhood WhatsApp group, once her gossip playground, was now flooded with laughing emojis and comments like, "Did she really think she'd win with a pool noodle?" Even the Homeowners Association, which had previously entertained Patricia's complaints, posted a vague announcement about respecting private property. Ethan, sitting on the porch with a cold lemonade, watched the digital storm with a quiet smile. The pool sparkled behind him, a trophy reclaimed. The dust from the battle seemed to have settled, but Willow Creek still buzzed with the echoes of Patricia's meltdown. The morning after the noodle incident, as Ethan swept his lawn, the familiar sound of sirens cut through the air. He paused, heart skipping for a second, then saw the police car pull up in front of Jake's house. Two officers stepped out, one of them Officer Mendez, who was already familiar with the saga. Patricia, still in the same now dirt-stained floral dress, stood on the sidewalk, gesturing like she was conducting a tragic opera. "It was him," she shouted, pointing at Ethan's house. "He provoked me, humiliated me in front of everyone." Ethan, leaning on the broom, watched from a distance, calm as someone who knew the truth was on his side. Jake, phone in hand, handed over the video to the officers, and Mendez watched with the expression of someone trying not to roll her eyes. The footage was clear. Patricia throwing the noodle, yelling insults, slipping on the grass, and falling into the leaves. No amount of editing could salvage that scene. "Mrs. Hayes," said Mendez, her tone a mix of fatigue and authority, "you attempted to assault Mr. Carter and caused a public disturbance. We're going to need you to come with us." Patricia's jaw dropped as she tried to argue. "This is unfair. I'm the victim here." But the officers, already out of patience, guided her to the car, handcuffs gleaming in the sun as she screamed for anyone who would listen. Ethan remained on the porch, relief mixing with a deep exhaustion. He hadn't wanted this war, but Patricia had forced it, and now she was reaping what she sowed. As the police car drove off, he checked his phone and saw Jake's video exploding on X, now with millions of views. Hashtags like Patricia Noodle and Justice for Ethan were trending, and hilarious edits were popping up everywhere. Patricia falling in slow motion with opera music, or the noodle flying with action movie sound effects. Local news outlets, smelling. A story published headlines like, "The Noodle Lesson: How Arrogance Took Down a Neighbor." Social media analysts dissected the case as an example of bias and entitlement, while comedians turned the fall into viral sketches. Weeks later, the Willow Creek Courthouse was a circus. Reporters filled the halls, cameras flashing, and curious neighbors packed every seat. Ethan, in a neatly pressed dress shirt, walked in with the calm of someone who had done his homework. Judge Miguel Torres, a middle-aged Latino man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness, presided over the case with a presence that commanded silence. The charges against Patricia were serious: trespassing, filing a false police report, and attempted assault. Ethan testified clearly, his voice firm in the courtroom. He presented footage from his cameras: Patricia kicking the fence, entering his yard, throwing the noodle, and screenshots of her posts, filled with veiled comments about new neighbors and her father's racist legacy. Neighbors, including Jake and an older woman who once supported Patricia, confirmed her pattern of behavior, describing months of gossip and intimidation. When it was Patricia's turn, the courtroom held its breath. Wearing a navy blue blazer, that didn't hide her nerves, she began with a rehearsed victim tone. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, voice trembling. "I just wanted to preserve the neighborhood's harmony." But when she saw Ethan sitting calmly, her composure cracked. "It's all lies," she shouted, pointing at him. "Hayes turning everyone against me because he's jealous of my family's legacy." Judge Torres raised a hand, his face expressionless. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice as sharp as steel, "your family's legacy is precisely why we're here. Your actions have consequences, and this courtroom is not a stage for tantrums." Her lawyer, a man in a rumpled suit, tried to calm her, but Patricia kept muttering about unfair treatment, each word digging her deeper. The verdict came like thunder. Torres, with the gravity of someone who knows the weight of his words, announced 4 months in prison for trespassing, false accusations, and attempted assault, followed by 1 year of probation and 150 hours of community service. Patricia froze, her hands trembling as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, cameras capturing every detail. As she was led away, her eyes met Ethan's for a brief moment. There was no arrogance left, only a defeated emptiness. Outside the courthouse, the saga of Patricia's pool noodle became legend. Influencers analyzed the case in live streams, comedians created sketches featuring pool noodles, and the video of the fall was everywhere, a symbol of how arrogance and prejudice can bring down even the most confident. Ethan, back in his yard, dove into the pool, the cold water washing away the fatigue of battle. The neighborhood, now quiet, finally seemed at peace. But as he floated, Ethan reflected. Victory was sweet, but Willow Creek still carried scars from the past. He knew his home, his pool, his space were more than trophies. They were a reminder that belonging is something you earn, not something you're given. Ethan never wanted to be the star of a digital circus, with hashtags and memes celebrating his victory. All he ever wanted was simple: a house, a pool, a little corner to call his own. The war with Patricia had tested his patience to the limit, but after the trial, the backyard became a sanctuary once again. The sun reflected off the crystal-clear water, the silence broken only by the occasional bird song or the soft hum of the pool filter. Ethan spent his mornings sweeping the deck, not out of obligation, but for the pleasure of caring for what he had earned through so much effort. The black fence, once a symbol of conflict, was now just a detail, as natural as the rose bushes he had planted along it. The neighborhood, once a minefield of gossip, began to change. Neighbors who once remained neutral, perhaps intimidated by Patricia's venom, started to approach. First came the elderly lady from the corner, Mrs. Clara, who knocked on his door with a plate of brigadeiros and an invitation to the book club. "You have to come, Ethan," she said, her eyes shining. "We're reading a mystery, and I think you've got a knack for solving them." Then came Jake, the teenager from the viral video, shy but smiling, inviting Ethan to a barbecue at his parents' house. "No pool noodles, I promise," he joked, and Ethan laughed, feeling the ice begin to melt. The highlight came on a sunny Saturday, when Ethan arrived home and found his backyard transformed. Colorful balloons floated over the pool, a table full of snacks occupied the deck, and flamingo and unicorn floaties danced in the water. Neighbors of all ages were there. Kids swimming, adults laughing, someone strumming an out-of-tune guitar with enthusiasm. Mrs. Clara, wearing a straw hat that vaguely resembled Patricia's, shouted, "Surprise, Ethan!" Jake, holding a lemonade, admitted, "We just wanted to show you that Willow Creek is more than, well, you know who." Ethan stood still, his throat tight, as the neighborhood he had fought to call home embraced him. He dove into the pool, the cold water wrapping around him like relief. As he floated, watching the clouds drift across the sky, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The laughter of children, the clinking of glasses, the scent of sunscreen and barbecue. That was what he had imagined when buying the house. Not a war, not a stage for memes, but a life. He looked at the fence, now adorned, with little lights someone had hung for the party, and thought about how it all began. A pool, a neighbor, a pool noodle. The irony made him smile. Meanwhile, miles away, Patricia was facing a much less festive reality. In a grey cell with peeling walls and a thin mattress, she had no pools, no straw hats, and no privileges. For years she believed she was untouchable, the queen of Willow Creek, with her legacy as a shield. But Karma, with its cruel sense of humor, had other plans, and brought a pool noodle to the fight. Guards said she mumbled about injustice while doing cleaning duties, but no, one paid attention. The world had moved on, and Patricia for the first time was just a footnote. Back at the pool, Ethan raised a glass of juice, toasting with Jake and Mrs. Clara. The video of Aka Patricia's pool noodle was still circulating, a cultural phenomenon that mixed laughter with a sharp critique of prejudice and arrogance. But for Ethan, the real victory wasn't in the millions of views or the comedian's sketches. It was right there, in the cool water, in the voices of his neighbors, in the backyard he had won back. He had bought the house to build a life, and against all odds, that's exactly what he was living.